Okay, let's talk about a word we all think we know, acceptance. This deep dive was requested by Sachin Karnik, a presenter and researcher with the Angel Wing LLC, and it poses a really fascinating question. What if our entire understanding of acceptance is, well, wrong? What if it's not about giving up, but about gearing up? What if it's not a passive retreat, but one of the most powerful strategic tools you could ever have? Let's get into it. So, here's our game plan for this masterclass. We're going to break it down into 6 parts. First, we'll nail down the big mistake most of us make about acceptance. Then, we'll introduce a new definition that changes everything, one that's all about accuracy. After that, we'll see how this works in some pretty intense real-world situations, use some powerful analogies to make it stick, and then look at the proof from different fields of science that backs this all up. And finally, we'll wrap it all into a practical guide you can actually use. All right, let's start by tackling our own assumptions head on. Seriously, when I say the word acceptance, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of people, it's kind of like a feeling of giving in, of resignation, maybe even a little bit of weakness. But that right there, that's the trap. That misunderstanding completely drains the concept of all its power. Now, this slide really lays it all out. On the left, you've got the common view, and it's a total mess of emotion and judgment, right? We confuse accepting something with approving of it, thinking you have to like it. And that leads to this idea of resignation, of just throwing in the towel, which makes it feel like a weakness. But active alignment, it's a complete 180. Instead of approval, it demands accuracy, just seeing things exactly as they are. Instead of resignation, it gives you clarity, pure, clean data to work with. And because of that, it's not weakness at all, it's strength. It's the only logical starting point for any smart move. And just to be crystal clear, this is not some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card for avoiding your problems. It is not a spiritual bypass, where you pretend to be all zen and enlightened just so you don't have to deal with the messy, painful stuff. And it's definitely not a psychological retreat. It's not about hiding from the problem or pretending it's not your responsibility. No way. It's the exact opposite. It's about finding the courage to look the problem right in the eye with total clarity. So if acceptance isn't about giving up or hiding, then what is it? Well, we need a better definition. We need to upgrade the whole concept from a passive feeling to an active, disciplined way of seeing the world. This is where it gets really good. And here it is. This is the core idea. Active alignment is the conscious alignment with what is factually present before you slap a judgment or a reaction onto it. It's an intentional act of seeing without distortion. The keywords here are conscious, factual, and prior to judgment. This isn't something that just happens. It's a choice. It's a commitment to see what's actually there before you decide how you feel about it or what you're going to do. It's about creating this tiny, clean space of pure perception. Now, this whole practice is built on something called epistemic honesty. It sounds academic, but it's a really cool concept. It's basically about being honest with yourself about what you know. It's the discipline of letting the raw data, the facts, what you actually see and hear, come into your brain without you immediately trying to spin it or filter it through your hopes and fears. It's about truthful knowing before you start telling a story about it. So this is how it works in practice, moment to moment. Step 1, something happens. Anything. Step 2, and this is the part we almost always skip, is acceptance. This is the mirror phase. You just let the reality of what happened register fully and accurately, without distortion. And only then, as a totally separate third step, do you react. See, most of us collapse steps 2 and 3 into one big, messy, emotional explosion. The secret to this whole thing is learning to pry them apart. And this right here, this is the golden rule. Acceptance is not the end of the interaction, it is the necessary beginning of an intelligent response. Just think about that for a second. We're all taught to think of acceptance as the finish line, right? Oh, I just have to accept it. But this flips that completely on its head. Acceptance isn't the end of the story, it's the first page of the strategy guide. It's the prerequisite for any smart action. You just can't solve a problem you refuse to actually look at. Okay, enough with the theory. Theory is great, but let's see where the rubber meets the road. What does active alignment actually look like when the stakes are high, when your emotions are screaming at you? Let's walk through 3 really different scenarios to see it in action.
So imagine you get a serious medical diagnosis. The typical distorted reaction is to go straight to denial. No, this can't be right. Or to catastrophize. That's it, my life is over. And look, those feelings are totally understandable, but they waste so much precious energy fighting a fact that already exists. It's like arguing with the weather. Active alignment is different. You acknowledge the diagnosis as a data point. It's a horrible piece of data, for sure, but it's data. And what that does is free up 100% of your energy to actually manage the situation, to find the right doctors, to explore treatments, to make a real plan. You shift from being a victim of the fact to being the strategist dealing with it.
Or let's take it into our relationships. Think about a parent who's super extroverted and has a child who's naturally shy and introverted. The distorted reaction is for the parent to try and fix the child, right? Pushing them to be more social, calling them too sensitive. What's really happening is the parent is interacting with a fantasy child they have in their head, and it just creates friction and pain. Active alignment is when the parent drops the story of how my child is supposed to be and starts engaging with the child who is actually there. The whole dynamic shifts from friction to flow because you're finally seeing and loving the person who's real. And what about in the professional world? A startup fails. The distorted reaction is to get stuck in an ego story. You blame the market, you blame your team, or worse, you spiral into shame. I am a failure. Active alignment gives you the discipline to look at the cold, hard data and say, the model did not work. By separating the project's failure from your own identity, you can actually learn the lesson, see what went wrong, and pivot to the next thing smarter and stronger. The failure becomes tuition you paid, not a tattoo on your forehead. So those scenarios are great, but sometimes the best way to really get your head around a big idea is with a few simple analogies. We're going to look at 3 metaphors now that will help lock this concept into your brain and make it feel totally intuitive. First up, the dirty windshield. Trying to solve a problem without accepting it is like driving down the highway in a storm with mud all over your windshield. Non-acceptance is just hitting the gas, squinting, and hoping you don't hit anything. We all know how that ends. Acceptance is the simple, practical act of pulling over for 30 seconds to clean the glass. It doesn't change your destination, but it restores your ability to see. And the lesson is so critical. Any action you take without acceptance is just movement without visibility. Next, think about a scientist in a lab. This one's all about integrity. A scientist who starts fudging the numbers because they don't fit their favorite theory isn't doing science anymore. They're just making stuff up. They've destroyed the whole project. True acceptance is like the discipline of a great scientist. You have to record the data exactly as it is, even and especially if it proves you wrong. The lesson is simple. You just can't solve a problem if you're lying to yourself about the variables. And finally, my favorite one, the mirror. Non-acceptance is like a funhouse mirror. It stretches, it squishes, it distorts reality to make it look how we want it to look. But active alignment, that's like a perfectly flat, clean mirror. It has no opinion. It doesn't add a flattering filter or a scary shadow. It just reflects what's there with perfect fidelity. And that's the key. This practice is passive when it comes to judgment, but it is incredibly active in its commitment to reflecting the truth. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, this is a really great psychological tool or a nice philosophy, but it actually goes so much deeper than that. This idea of seeing reality clearly first isn't just a mental model. It seems to be a fundamental requirement for how any complex system works, from your brain to a supercomputer. And this is just so cool. Look at how this idea shows up everywhere. In neuroscience, your brain literally can't learn without something called prediction error. It's constantly guessing what's going to happen, and when it's wrong, it has to accept that error signal to get smarter. Denying the error is literally delusion. In philosophy, you have to describe what is before you can explain why. And in the hard-nosed world of systems engineering, it's the oldest rule in the book: garbage in, garbage out. If you feed a system bad data, you get a bad result, every time. In every single one of these fields, accurate perception, acceptance, is step 1. Okay, so we've torn down the old, broken idea of acceptance. We've built a new, powerful one. We've seen it work in the wild, and we've seen the science that backs it up. So now, for the most important part. How do we actually put this into practice? Let's turn all this theory into a simple, actionable guide. It really boils down to a 3-step dance, and it's something you can practice. First, the pause. The second something happens, you just stop. You create a tiny little gap between the event and your usual knee-jerk reaction. Second, in that space, you practice the alignment. You just state the facts, without any story. Not, that jerk cut me off because he's a terrible person, but that car moved into my lane. You're just mirroring reality. And only then, third, comes the response. Once you're standing on the solid ground of what's actually true, you can choose a smart action instead of just having an emotional spasm. And this slide really sums up the whole manifesto. These are the core principles. But listen to this one. Resistance consumes energy arguing with reality. Acceptance frees energy to respond to it. That's the whole ballgame right there. Every bit of energy you waste wishing things were different is energy you can't use to make things different. And this one too. You cannot orient yourself in a world you refuse to look at clearly. I mean, how can you make a good plan with a bad map? You can't. Accuracy is the foundation of every good strategy.
Which brings us to this final thought, and it's a powerful one. The mind becomes powerful not when it controls reality, but when it stops misrepresenting it. Real strength isn't about forcing the world to be what you want it to be. It's about seeing the world with such incredible clarity that your actions become perfectly aligned with it. It's about realizing that true acceptance isn't a weakness. It is your ultimate strategic advantage.
And that is our deep dive on active alignment. A huge thanks for joining us. If you want more information on this work, please do contact Sachin Karnik. All of his information is right there in the description box below. Thanks again for watching.